Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Kuf Amud Beis, 8 lines from the bottom. The Gemara is explaining when a person is on a boat and he wants to draw water from the Yam. Generally the Yam is a Karmelis and the boat is a Rishus HaYochid. So what is he to do? One opinion says that indeed we measure the Karmelis from the bottom of the ground of the sea. And therefore, 10 tfachim up only is Karmelis. Above that is Mokum Petur. So when he draws the water, he's drawing water from a Mokum Petur. So Mi'ikir Hadin, he can take the water directly and bring it into the boat. But to make a heker, so people don't think that it's a problem of a Karmelis, he puts a ziz, a board that's from the walls of the Sfina onto the water, and makes a heker that way, and then he draws the water from the sea into the boat. Of course, we're talking about fresh water, a person would want to drink. A second opinion, however, says, no, we don't measure it from the ground, but rather we measure the Karmelis from the top of the water. That means the entire water is really the ground, and therefore the water itself will begin being part of the Karmelis. So how does a person get around this problem? He makes a area of 4 by 4 tfachim. He encloses it with 4 different makes partitions, and that itself will then be considered to be a Rishus HaYochid now. Then he can go ahead and draw water from the lake, from the sea, and then take that water from Rishus HaYochid into the boat, which is another Rishus HaYochid. Says the Gemara, Omar leRav Nachim and leRabbe bar Avua. The Gemara wants to challenge these two different opinions. LeRav Huna d'Omar moitzi heimen aziz kol shehu memale. The opinion that says that he just puts out the ziz and then he draws water, which means that he can mi'ikir hadin draw the water because the mokum petur from this lake. Zibnin de leka asora v'kametalta mekarmelis Rishus HaYochid. This whole understanding was based on the fact that there's asara tfachim, and thereby above that, the water itself is a makom petur. But if the depth of the water is not asara tfachim, then the water that you're drawing from is a karmelis, and therefore should be aser. Omalei gamrinon de'ein svina maleches bepochos me'asara. He says we know that when it comes to a svina, these are larger boats, and therefore, excuse me. They don't go on anything that is less than a Sarah Tfachim that have a depth. Otherwise, it can go into the ground of the bottom of the sea, and it can then become shipwrecked. It can be a problem. So therefore, it's not a problem. We're not concerned about such a scenario. Says the Gemara, Marsha Isla, but there's a protrusion in the front of the boat, which always comes out of the water. In other words, it's not a concern for the front of the boat to be really on an area that's less than asar tfachim. So therefore, if a person were to then draw water from that end, from the front of the boat, then it'll be a problem taking from a karmelis into the boat. Rav Safra explains that no, there's no problem because there are people, sailors, who stick out poles in order to then constantly feel the depth of the sea to make sure that they're not going too shallow, and therefore even the front of the boat will not get to a place that is less than asara tfachim. Now the Gemara asks on the other opinion. Amar leRav Nachim bar Yitzchok leRav Chil bar Abin leRav Chizda uleRabbe bar Rav Huna damrei oisei mokom arbo memale. They say that the way to do it, to draw water from this lake, would be to then make partition so that you have an area of dalad al dalad tfachim, making into Rishus HaYochid. Ask the Gemara, Shoichin didei heichi shadi luhu. If a person has waste water from the boat that he wants to then throw out, how will he do so? Answers the Gemara, v'chiteimo. Oh, the Gemara still persists. V'chiteimo the shadi luhu ba'oisei makoim. If you're going to say he just throws it in the same place where there's a partition of dalad al dalad tfachim, and therefore it's not a problem, it's going to the Rishus HaYochid, mois lay, it'll be disgusting. They won't want to draw water from that area, so certainly they're not going to throw bad water into that area. They'll throw the bad water from a different area. Answers the Gemara, the shadi lay adafna desfina. they'll throw it over the wall of the boat. Meaning they're not going to throw it, they're going to pour it over the water, over the wall of the boat, and then they'll go out that way. Ask the more, but still, but if he does that, then it'll come from his own koyach, and when it comes from your own koyach, that's still going to be osir. So therefore, how can you go ahead and solve this issue? Answers the Gemara, koychoy bekarmelis lo gazru. When it comes to koychoy, and the Karmelis, the Chachamim were makil, and they said it's not going to be an Isser in this scenario there, when your person would pour over the water, over the wall of the boat, even though Mikoichoi, it's then going to go into the Karmelis, it's not going to be Osir. And Minat Taimra, what do I know to say that they were not Goizer a Koichoi in Karmelis? The Tanya. Because it says in the Brayso says, follows Svina ein metaltalin, lo mitoicham toicha liyam, v'lo min hayam letoicha. The Tanna Kama says over here that when it comes to a Svina, you cannot metaltal not from the boat into the yam, and not from the yam into the boat. Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, Amuka Asara, we're on top of Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph. Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, Amuka Asara, if the boat has a depth of Asara Tfachim, because it goes into the water. It has a belly that goes into the water because of the heaviness on the boat itself. Ve'en gvoya asar, yet the walls don't go up asar tfachim beyond the water. Metaltalim mitoicha liyam, avaloi min hayam letoicha. Rabbi Yehuda says you can go ahead and metaltil from the boat to the yam, and not from the yam to the boat. Because over here we're talking about that there's less than asara tfachim, so he says over here that you can even go ahead and metalta from the boat to the yam, but not from the yam to the boat. I asked the Gemara on this statement, "My shna min hayam letoicha deloi dekam metaltalin mikarmel shusa yochid mitoicha liyam nami metaltalin mishusa yochid likarmel." It's the same way that the reason why you can't metalta from the yam to the boat is because you're taking from karmelis to a shusa yochid. And therefore it's osir. So similarly, you should say in the other direction. You can't take from the boat to the yam, which is taking from the b'shus hayachi to the karmelis. Elo lav achuda. Rather, is another abuse talking about when you're pouring it over the edge. The shmamina koicho kim bekarmelis lo gazru shmamina. And therefore, we can conclude that indeed koicho bekarmelis achamim were makil. And over here, this is a machloikis only in regards to the situation of being less than asara tfachim high. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda argued on the Chachamim, but everybody would agree that indeed if it was talking about a wall that was above asara tfachim, that you can go ahead and pour it over the wall. So therefore, even the Chachamim in the Tanna Kama would agree that koichoi bekarmelis loy gazru. The Gemara now brings in regards to then carrying within a boat itself, Omar Rav Huna Hani Bitziyasa the Meishon. These are small boats in Meishon that were wide on top, but then it would become narrow when it comes down to the bottom. Ein metaltalin bohen ela be'arba. Now here, the girsa really should be Ein metaltalin bohen ela be'arba, referring to 4 amos. In other words, it's coming to say that this area of the boat is not a reshus hayachid because it doesn't have the proper partitions, the proper mechitzois in the space between, in the width, in the area, and therefore one can only carry arba amos because it's a karmelis, less than arba amos, but more than that would be considered to be an isser. And that which they said this would be a problem is only elish ein bepachos mishloisha arba. That's when you don't have arba tfachim in between the walls, within 3 tfachim from the bottom of the boat. In other words, it goes down, and when it becomes more narrow, so then it's only talking about this when it's not yet 4 tfachim within 3 tfachim of the bottom. So it's higher than 3 tfachim at the bottom. Then we're saying over here that you cannot carry arba amos because it's not a reshus hayachid, it's a karmelis. However, if it does become narrowed within 3 tfachim of the arba tfachim walls, then indeed it's not a problem, because we'll say lavud. Aval yesh bepachas megimel arba leslon ba. But if we have arba tfachim of the walls, the width of the walls are arba tfachim, and then it gets more narrow, but it gets narrow within 3 tfachim of the bottom. So then the bottom is going to be connected to the arba tfachim space in between the walls, and therefore, as long as you have asar tfachim high, it's a reshus hayachid. V'imalinhu kani va'orvani leslon ba. But even a scenario where it does not become narrowed within 3 tfachim, it's even higher than 3 tfachim, whereby we said it's still going to be a karmelis, and you cannot walk and carry more than arba amos. That is talking about where you didn't fill it in. But if you filled it in with reeds and with aravois, willows, so then that will make it so that it's filled in, and whereby you have then partitions that have the walls that go down all the way until the bottom of the boat. The Gemara challenges this. Maskif lo Rav Nachman v'lema gud achis mechitzasa. In other words, you're saying that the problem over here is that it's only wide on the top, but it gets narrower down below, whereby it's walls that are hanging in the air, mechitzas tluyos. So therefore, you're saying that there's a problem over here as being a karmelis, and it's not a reshus hayachid because it doesn't have partitions going all the way down. So Gemara is asking, what about good achis? What about the fact that we have a concept that the walls can be brought down halachically? Milotani doesn't say in the following brayso, Rabbi Yosi bar Yehuda oimer noatz kana b'reshus harabim u'berosh traskal. If a person put a stick in the reshus harabim, and on the top he has a basket that has arba tfachim, that's the area, v'noch al gabov chayiv, and he throws an object from the reshus harabim onto this basket, he's going to be chayiv for hachnasa from the reshus harabim to reshus hayachid. How is he chayiv? Hare, we don't have walls that are going to be asar tfachim, because we're talking about it's a stick that's into the ground holding this basket. So granted, the basket itself is arba al arba, but where do we have the walls? Elamai, you must say that the walls are coming down, and we say halachically good achis mechitzta. So the Gemara says alma mina good achis mechitzta. So therefore, it should be considered to be over here as well. There should be a good achis for the walls of the boat. Granted, they become more narrow, but before they become narrow, while they're still arba tfachim apart, so then you should allow those walls to come down. Hochanami nema good achis mechitzta. Answers so the Gemara now comes back and challenges the other way. Maski for Rav Yosef, to show there's a difference. V'loi shmiya luluhu l'omar Rav Yehuda marav umati ba mishum Rabbi Chia. Some say it was Rabbi Chia said v'tani alo chachamim poitim, that there's a machlokes about this. In other words, you are saying this b'shem Rabbi Yehuda, that indeed we say good achis mechitza in the case of the traskel of the basket, but the chachamim argue and say that he would be potter if he threw an object from the reshus harabim onto this basket, because we don't say good achis over here. Omar le Abaye. Now Abaye says, wait a second. The reason why the chachamim say that you don't say good achis over here is because there's a technicality that makes it so we can't say good achis. But in general, when we don't have that technicality, we would say good achis as follows. V'adlo tizbura, do you not agree as well by saying the following? V'hatanya, the Brisa says, Amud v'reshus harabim, gavoya asara, v'rochav dalet. If you have an amud, you have a pillar on the reshus harabim that has the height of asar tfachim, and it has the width of dalet tfachim. However, this pillar that we're talking about, this amud, is not arba tfachim all the way down. It only has arba tfachim on the top, but it becomes more narrow towards comes to the bottom. Vein bi'ikaro dalet, but it doesn't have at the base dalet tfachim. V'yesh b'kotzar shaloi gimel, but it has in its narrow part within 3 tfachim. It has the narrow part. Its narrow part is 3 tfachim. V'zorak v'noch al gabov chayiv. And a person will throw an object on top of this amud. So then we're going to say that he would be chayiv. How can he be chayiv? Answers the Gemara, Alma Amrin Gud Achis Mechitzoso, because it's Gud Achis. Hochanami, so too over here in the boat, we can say the same thing, Gud Achis Mechitzto. And therefore Abai then brings back and defends, saying that the original question, that we should have Gud Achis when it comes to the boat's walls, and allow the person to then carry freely on the boat, even beyond Dalid Amois, because it's a Rishus HaYachid. The Gemara says, Midi area, and this is Abai continuing to speak and concluding his proof. He says, is it not then proven, Hasam Havil Mechitza Shagedim Bokimbo? What do you say about the Traska where you said the Chacham say Potter? There it's because we don't say Gud Achis, because Gedin, young goats, can walk through and they can go into the Mechitzos. Therefore, it's not considered to be a good Mechitza according to Chachamim. But Hacha, over here, Havil Mechitza. But over in case of the Amud, here there's not going to be young goats that can walk through, and therefore we would say Gud Achis. Similarly, when it comes to the boat, they're not going to have goats that can walk through, and therefore, indeed, we should say Gud Achis is here as well. Omarle Rav Acha b'Rav Acha Rav Ashi Gabe Svina Nami Ha'ika Bakaz Dogim. You're right, you don't have Gedim, you don't have goats, but you have fish that will then be boikin, that will then go through the mechitza. Omar lei, Rav Ashi said back, Bekiyas dogim lo shmei bekiya. But the fact that dogim, that fish will go through, that doesn't ruin the wall, and therefore even the Chacham would agree that you can still say Gud Achis. Uminotema, where do I know to say that the dogim, the fish, do not ruin the concept of Gud Achis? The boy mine Rabbi Tavla Merovin Mechitza Tluya Mahu Shetate Bechurva. He asked the question: do a mechitza in a churva, in a place where it was already destroyed? The ruins over here have the top parts of the wall. So the top part of the wall, do we say that they can be brought down to make a mechitza into making the area a rishus hayachid, or not? Omar le ein mechitza tluya materes elo b'mayim kal hu sheikilu chacham b'mayim. We're on top of Kuf Aleph Amud Beis. Here the Gemara says that the answer to his questions by the ruins, he said you cannot bring down the wall to make Gud Achis. They were only making when it comes to water. V'amai ha'ika b'kaz dogim. How can they then be making to say Gud Achis when it comes to the water? Hare, there are dogim, there are fish that will then go through. Elishma'amina bekim dogim lo shma bekia. Rather, you must say that the bekia of dogim do not interfere to make then the walls go down and the concept of Gud Achis. And therefore, we find that indeed, if there's, let's say, a building that's on top of, let's say, a lake, and you have a protruding balcony that goes out of the building, so a person who makes a mechitzas around that balcony, even though they don't extend all the way down to the lake underneath it, he can make a hole in the bottom, and he can draw water from the lake into his balcony. So here we do see the concept of Gud Achis, even though there are going to be fish going through. And therefore, the question remains when it comes to the Sfina. The Sfina also, we should say Gud Achis Mechitza, and therefore it's a challenge on the original din that he was saying that a person cannot walk Dalid Amois in the Sfina.